Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Second Son Woodworks here on my YouTube channel. My name is Caleb, and today I'm going to be starting off a new project on how I built a store sign for my sister's country store in Elliston, Montana. Hope you'll stick around. The very first step in making this large wooden sign for my sister's store was to create a backing that was 10 feet long. Now, my sister and I went back and forth on how big to make the sign, and we decided to go with a 10-foot long sign so that it could stretch across the full front section of the store, which you will see in another part of this video series. But the issue is none of the stores, the local stores in Helena, Montana, and or near Elliston, near Helena, had 10-foot long plywood that was 3/4 inch thick. After doing a good amount of research and calling around to all of the local stores that were in the Helena area, I couldn't find a piece that was 10 feet long and 3/4 inch without having to special order it. Now, I'm probably going to get some comments on here from people saying that you could definitely find a 10-foot long piece of plywood, but I couldn't. So I decided to make my own. So to start off this series on how I made a store sign, I'll be kicking it off with this first video on how I made a 10-foot long piece of plywood. First, I picked up two pieces of 4-foot by 8-foot long 3/4 inch plywood from Home Depot, and I took the first piece and cut it down to 3 feet long. I used a chalk line, some clamps, and a piece of walnut that had a straight edge on one side to help out with this process. After the piece was cut, I set the 5-foot long piece aside and then went ahead and grabbed the other 8-foot long piece. Luckily, I had my sister's storage room at her local Elliston store to make into my workshop for about a month. And I spent my evenings working on the sign during the holidays. Next, I took the 3-foot long piece of plywood and marked a line 1 foot from one edge. After using my pencil and my tape measure to make a couple marks down the whole width of the piece of plywood, I then used my chalk line to make a nice clear line. So after checking the line with a straight piece of walnut, I went ahead and grabbed the circular saw and adjusted the depth of the circular saw so that it was only as deep as half of the thickness of the 3/4 inch plywood, which half of 3/4 inches is 3/8 of an inch. And then I used the straight piece of walnut, some clamps, and I attached it to the piece of plywood to serve as a rail. Now, what I'll be doing next is using the circular saw to cut out many strips, many cuts through the area of the piece of plywood from the line over to the edge, so that whole area that is marked out a foot from one edge. And this is going to create a type of half lap cut on one end of the piece of plywood. I know that I will get a bunch of comments on here about alternative methods for doing this exact same thing, such as using with a router, but I wanted to experiment with doing it with a circular saw and then using my chisels so that I didn't have to use a power tool for so long. I wanted to be able to use my chisels and not create as much dust. Now, I am creating a lot of dust inevitably by using my circular saw in this method, but all in all, I think that the time that it would take to do this exact same thing with a router as opposed to a circular saw is pretty comparable. Do you want to see this cool step?
Oh God. Yeah, do a TikTok of me like this. How come I can't be in the video?
Let's see if this works. Now, I ended up having to do some additional cuts with my circular saw to take out just a bit more of the plywood to make it a little bit easier for my chisel and the removal of just 3/8 inch of the plywood, but ultimately it worked out pretty well. So after that, I spent the next 30 minutes or so chiseling away at the plywood and getting my arms warmed up. Needed to happen because, well, it was pretty cold outside. Okay.
I think I like.
Now, if you're going to be doing this with a circular saw or even with a router, make sure that you wear some air protection for your nostrils and your mouth. I recommend the RZ mask because it's easy to put on and to remove. But either way, wear a mask. Also, wear some eye protection and some ear protection. You're not invincible. Don't act like you are.
When I'm done here.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Is that fine?
You don't need to worry about me.
And I guess it doesn't matter if you want to.
If you haven't spent any time using a chisel consistently, I think it's a good thing to try out. It's not easy right away and it takes some practice, but you can do a lot with a chisel and a hammer. And it's kind of like one of the more traditional tools within the woodworking world. So get yourself a chisel. These chisels are just some DeWalt construction chisels. They're not the best, but I have definitely been exploring options for investing in some really nice chisels. It's also good to learn how to sharpen your chisels because you're going to need to sharpen them unless there's some sort of crazy expensive Damascus steel or something like that. And I've said this a couple times on some other videos, but if you know of a good set of chisels that you would recommend that are a bit more expensive, a bit fancier, throw them in the comment section below. So while I am chiseling away at this plywood, I'm going to take a moment to promote the Second Son Woodworks YouTube channel. If you haven't hit the subscribe button below and the little bell icon next to it, hit those right now. There's a good way to support the channel and ensure that you get a notification every time I post a new video. Also, if you got any questions or comments, leave them below. I'm also on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the good ones. So go check the Second Son Woodworks page out over there. I also have a website now that has some products for sale, has a gallery with all of my work, it has a blog, it has a list of my tools. Lots of cool stuff. It's a great place to visit. So go check it out. I also use my Stanley Surfform hand plane, which is a little bit different than a regular hand plane, but this has been a trusty tool for a long time. I'll put a link in the description below. Once all of the wood was removed, I swept things off and took a really deep breath and examined what I had done with my own hands. And I gotta say, I was very, very happy. But with any woodworking you do without dust collection, there is a lot of scraps all over at the end. It's like a crime scene. Well, by this time it was clearly nighttime, and I needed to make my way all the way home to my parents' house where I was staying, which was a solid 45 minutes away. Yeah, I did that drive a lot. After some much needed rest, I returned to the store to do the exact same process to the other piece of plywood, the 8-foot long piece of plywood that I hadn't cut. And so to start out, I marked out a line a foot from one edge and then started hacking away with my circular saw. There really isn't anything like waking up early in the morning and breathing lots of wood dust. I love it. Love how it feels. Love how it makes my body feel. It's amazing. But since you had already watched me do this process with the other piece of plywood, I decided to speed this video up for the second piece. Hope it's not too fast for you. If it is, well, watch the first half of this video. So I decided to do a dry test fit to make sure that the half-lap joint between these two separate pieces of plywood worked. Now, it wasn't perfect at first, so I had to do some adjustments. And I used my circular saw to make the space just a little bit longer on the 8-foot long piece of plywood. Then after that, it was ready to go. It was ready to glue up. You'll notice that I'm wearing a Santa Claus hat because I was building this sign just before Christmas, back last year, and I wanted to get into the festive spirit of the holidays. So I decided to wear a hat. Merry Christmas. I made sure to use a hefty amount of Type Bond 2 wood glue to join these two boards together because I didn't want it falling apart down the road. That sure would be a big bummer. After spreading the glue around with my little glue brush and wiping things off of my hands, I went ahead and joined the boards together. This part was very, 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 very satisfying. Following, I used my trusty Bessie clamps to clamp the edges where the half-lap joint for the two different boards was overlapping. And off camera, you won't see it in this video, I used a DeWalt sliding miter saw that I was borrowing from my brother to add some weight in the middle of the board as the glue was drying. Now, because I'm only human, the joint was not completely perfect. So I used some sawdust and some spare glue to fill in some of the cracks that were left over, and this pretty much hid the imperfections that came about. Alright folks, that is how you create a 10-foot long piece of 3/4 inch plywood. If none of the stores in town stock it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around for the rest of the series on how I made the store sign for my sister's store in Elliston, Montana. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.